There's been a change in the agenda. Shannon Rupert could not make it. She is preparing her PhD defense, which is going to come up in just a couple of weeks. So instead, we're going to have a panel to discuss the season at the Mars Desert Research Station. Shannon is the director of the station, but we have a lot of other people have participated. Myself from a distance as head of the Mars Society. Gene Hunter is on the remote science team for the station. And at the far end is Peter Detterline, who directs the Mdrs Observatory. And then we have 3 crew members here, Ian Silversides, Paul Knightley, and Paul Sokoloff, right? Who are 3 crew members. I believe at crew 143.
Yep.
Okay, and by the way, okay, we're now up into the 150s on our crews, 6 people each, plus our the Arctic cruise brings us now to 1,000 people have served as crew members in either the desert or the Arctic station. So we are democratizing the space program. No, but I mean, it's important. It means that 1,000 people, many of whom have some relationship to the space program, have had some experience of what it might be like to operate on Mars, and thereby get some intuitions into what might be useful to develop to support Mars missions and what are aside from the point. And I'll just give you one example. I could give you many. Before we started this program, you would go to conferences and there would be people there saying things like, when we have a crew on Mars, they're going to be there for a year and a half, they're not going to have that much to do, we need to think of ways to give them something to do. Okay, which is the exact opposite of the situation. Our problem has not been boredom. When we've had problems, it's been overwork. And the last thing a Mars crew needs is some way for NASA scientists to fill up their time with useless activities. Many other things. I'll give you another example. One concept that somebody had was developing a robotic llama for a Mars crew. And the concept here was somewhat like, backpackers. Among a certain set of backpackers, it's popular to have a llama carrying your pack. You hike along, the llama carries your big, heavy backpack, and it, makes it better for you. So there's a thought there. So they created this robot to carry tools to follow the pedestrian astronauts around. And it had some mechanical issues, but it mostly worked. However, it was completely useless because it moved slower than the astronauts, even on foot, and much slower than when they were on ATVs, okay? And the crews mostly travel around on the vehicles, and this thing could not remotely keep up. And, when you're cavalry, you don't bring llamas. Okay. So, and there it is. And if you want to carry tools, put it on the back of the ATV. So just getting a better picture of what the Mars mission is like can really be a guide for technological development. I mean, the most important step in any technology program is defining the requirements. Okay. Yes, it is important to design things right, but it's even more important to design the right thing. Okay. And so with these operational simulations, we've been able to gain increased insight into that now. There's been a lot of papers published. There's been at least 3 books that have been written about this program that I know of, one of which is mine, and a couple in the French language. But we're learning a lot, and individuals who are participating are learning a lot. Now, not everybody draws the same conclusions from the experience, but nevertheless, at least people are drawing conclusions from experience instead of just complete suppositions. Now, we just completed a field season, and one of the features of this field season was a test, a down select process, if you will, towards the recruitment of our crew for Mars Arctic 365. And we had over 200 people volunteer to participate as crews in Mars Arctic 365. And then going through resumes and so forth, we down selected that to about 60 semifinalists. And then I asked for more detailed information, including videos from those 60. And on the basis of that, we down selected to 21, which we divided into 3 candidate crews of 7, which were then sent to the Mars Desert Research Station last fall. These were crews 142, 143, 144. We made them 7-person crews because we wanted to have alternates, and in some cases, one of the crew members did not show, and those were actually 6-person crews. Okay. Now, those were all very good crews, but of them, it was the evaluation of me and several other evaluators that the crew 143 was the strongest. And that was a remarkable crew. It included Americans, Canadians, including both English and French Canadians, a Frenchman, and a Russian. And in fact, they even wrote reports in English, French, and Russian, which were remarkable. There were also, though, a couple of very strong crew members from another crew, I think crew 142. And so we have now down selected to 9 people. But before we send them to the Arctic, we really want to get a better sense of them in a longer duration exercise than a 2-week MDRS crew rotation. So we're going to do a 12-week MDRS crew rotation. And it's called MA80, Mars Awakening 80. And it will consist of the members of crew 143, 3 of whom are here, Ian Silversides, Paul Knightley, and Paul Sokoloff. Knightley, Sokoloff, Silversides. And then also 2 members of crew 142, which was Christiane Heineke and Carmel Johnson, I believe. Christiane is German, and Carmel is an American. So that is theoretically 9 people. This is going to take place in the fall of 2016. Okay, so there's going to be adequate time to prepare for this. We want to handle this with a lot of support, have a very strong science program in it. We don't anticipate sending 9 to the Arctic. There may be somebody who drops out because they don't measure up, or maybe people who drop out because they find they have other commitments in their life and cannot participate. So at the end of the day, it will be filtered down to 6 or 7 people. But it's quite possible then that this crew will actually be able to post reports in 4 languages, that is, English, French, German, and Russian, and be a truly international crew and be able to have terrific outreach to the world. So some of the crew members are here, and they can give you their observations on their stay in MDRS and so forth. We also have Jean Hunter, who is a key member of the remote science team, and I guess she will lead with just a little bit of a review of this year's season. Then we can have remarks from other people, some of whom have visuals, others not, and then we can open this up to questions. So, Jean.
I will begin with just a brief run-through of the season. I prepared some slides to give you an idea visually as well as verbally of how the season went. And so I hope you'll enjoy these. Actually, Roberts talked very much about the MA365 team training and selection, so I won't. I'll just skip over that. But I'll give you a few photos from each of the crews and talk a little bit about the Green Hab fire, which took out one of our most beloved facilities at MDRS. And at the end, if we have time after the rest of the panel discussion, we can talk about astronomy. And I think you had a really great introduction to the University Rover competition last night. So again, we don't have to do that. So the science team is led by Cheryl Bishop, myself, and Shannon Rupert, who is also the mission director at MDRS. We receive proposals from all of the people who come to MDRS, because everybody has to come with some sort of a project, either their own project or assisting another crew member on a project. And each one of those projects is reviewed in preliminary form, and then we give feedback, and then they send us a updated proposal, and we finally approve it to make sure it's within the scope of MDRS, that it's going to be safe for everybody, and that it has a possibility of resulting in some good science. And then they send us a final proposal for the archives. There were over a dozen science team members involved in the review process, as well as members of the engineering team, and our proposals that were received are trending more and more towards engineering proposals, but we still had about half science proposals. Let's see. As Dr. Zubrin mentioned, that we added 3 rotations at the beginning of the season to accommodate selections of the Mars Arctic 365 crew. It's a huge pool of applicants. While they were in the MDRS, we were observing them through their interactions with Capcom. Afterwards, they each underwent a battery of tests and surveys that were developed by Dr. Cheryl Bishop, also the head of our science team. And after that, of the 20 people that were at the HAB, all but one were interested in moving forward with a 1-year mission in the Arctic. And the degree of enthusiasm and cooperation and expertise and just overall outstandingness among these crews was really impressive. I wish we had more options to send people to the Arctic, because we had more very well qualified people than could be accommodated. So it was a difficult down selection process. So let me run through the crews one by one. Crew 142 had a couple of different projects. There were some telemedical projects here where one of the people is pretending to have a broken leg and be otherwise incapacitated, and you can see that they've been loaded onto a stretcher and they're getting attention. Christiane Heineke also developed a solar oven. It's very difficult to develop something like this at MDRS because of the high winds that will catch that thing and just blow it right off, and will also take heat away from the material hung at the focal point. But hers it worked great, and we had boiling water within 10 to 20 minutes from this solar oven on a good day in October. Okay, here's a close-up. The first crew also planted new plants in the old green hab, and here are some of the lettuces that that they got started with. Now, Crew 143 did some construction work around the HAB, but they also studied lichens and endolithic algae. You can see some of the lichens on the left and the endolithic crust on the right. They also set up some stuff in the green hab. You can see now some of the materials that Crew 142 planted are thriving there. In the background, you might see what looks like pipes. These are rolls of material that are used for the pressurized tunnel from the hab to the observatory. This crew also had some wonderful photographers that took some great nighttime shots. Crew 144 was very much involved in construction. You can see them here building they designed and they built a 7th stateroom at Mdrs, so now our official capacity is 7 people. The 7th person doesn't have to lay on the floor in the loft anymore or sleep on the dining room table. There's actually a stateroom for them. They also did Susan Jewell, who's front and center in this photo, is interested in stress relief by traditional Eastern means, and so they did yoga and meditation. So as we moved into the regular part of the season, here are some of the experiments and things that the Crew 146 did. Now, the leader of this crew was Nick Ornstein, who was a green hab manager. Unfortunately, during his, let me go back, they set up some pots, a hydroponic system. You can see the pipes over there on the left next to the pots. And on the right, an experiment with LED lighting versus natural lighting. But unfortunately, there was a problem with the electrical system in there that resulted in an intense fire that pretty much totally destroyed the green hab. So for the green hab, it was tragic, but fortunately, even though it's quite near to the hab itself was not damaged, and none of the people that on the crew were hurt, even though they were involved in putting out the fire. Okay. Let's see, Crew 147, I'm going to be very brief here. They had a lot of work with drones and suits. You can see the drone, the front in the center, and in the back in the center, you can see a new design of helmet there that they were testing out. Crew 148, crewed by Lucy Poulet, who's with the German Space Agency. She's a French woman. She works for the German Space Agency, and she's interested in plants in space. She brought an internal, an inside type sort of closet or cabinet that's used for growing plants that replace the green hab for the rest of the season. Crew 149 went back to exobiology science. They collected a number of different lichens and were able to image them with the microscope at the hab. Now, Crew 150, our Peruvian crew, they were all engineers interested in mechatronics, so they worked on a number of different projects, and this is part of their project here for an improved backpack. You can see the structure at the bottom right is the same as we have over here that they built and brought. And so that was really interesting. These students were particularly responsive to science and engineering team feedback, and so we had a lot of really great back and forth with them in preparing for their mission. Crew 151 brought this interesting device here, which is called a cliff crawler, and it's got in the middle between the two wheels, it's got a camera and sensors and so forth, and it runs off of a rope, and you can just lower it over the side of a cliff, and the center of gravity will make it come over and cling to the cliff and run up and down the cliff, so that you can take a look at the the wonderful layers in the cliffs near MDRS without endangering either people or having to lug heavy equipment somewhere on an ATV. Very ingenious device here. Again, this year, as in the past 4 or 5 years, we've had 2 small crews, 1-week crews from McLennan Community College in Texas. This young engineer is working on a ham radio repeater, which worked perfectly until it got on the back of an ATV. These practical lessons about logistics are ones that will stay with the crews and the engineers and into the space community forever. Another project was a solar cell project using solar thermal collector and a thermoelectric device to produce electricity. And they also had a small a mini rover that you can see. This photo on the right reminds me of the drop that Kevin Sloan showed us yesterday with the big rovers. This is for a little rover, of course. As you can see, by the time Crew 153 got here, the green hab had been pretty much dismantled except for the ribs. And you can see the pressurized tunnel behind it stretching over to the observatory. Now, people who use the observatory won't have to suit up in their EVA suits to go to the observatory because we have the imaginary pressurized tunnel that runs between the hab and the observatory. Crew 153 also used the observatory pretty much, and if you're an astronomer, you'll recognize the Sombrero Galaxy here in the lower right. Okay. The last crew of the season stayed there for 3 weeks, and they did something that I don't think has been done at MDRS before. They brought a film crew, and they had a complete feature film, a 90-minute feature film, sort of a comedy drama about life on Mars and Mars tourism. The Czech producer is now hard at work on the editing, and I hope that next year or the year after we'll be able to show that film here. There are a lot of very funny bits, and I think you'll all enjoy it. They had so many film crew that they had to bring their own film truck here, and the extra crew slept there at night. They had an extra water supply. They had an extra bathroom here. All the comforts of a field station, and they were filming 15, 16 hours a day. So by the time they got done, they were just zonked. I think no one was ever so happy to go back home and get a shower. Well, that's all the slides, and we had a beautiful sunset to our field season this year, and some exciting things coming up for next year. So thank you very much.
One of the things that the planet Mars and MDRS have in common are incredibly dark skies. We have some of the darkest skies in North America right there, and to take advantage of that, we've got an amazing observatory, the Musk Observatory at MDRS. The observatory houses a 14-inch telescope, and it can be operated inside the observatory itself and also inside the comfort of the hab if it's a little cold to be outside. Telescope is totally automated. The dome follows the telescope wherever it wants to go in the sky. We've got camera systems where you can take pictures and see them off your computer right in the comfort of the hab. I have to say that everything is working beautifully, and everything is up to specs, and we're looking forward to another great season. We had a lot of good crew astronomers in there this year. We had one little hiccup, and we figured out that the hand control was broken. But we always keep a spare, so we were back up and running in no time. And I hope to see lots of people coming in to use the observatory. You can find access to that and to the training by going online, MDRS Musk Observatory, and that will give you the full treatment and we look forward to another great field season out there under the stars for Mars.
While Leah's getting that set up, we'll actually introduce ourselves and tell you a little bit about the research that we did at Crew 140, as part of Crew 143. My name is Paul Sokoloff. I'm a botanist from Canada. So you can imagine I was really excited when somebody finally wrote a book about me. Sorry. My job at Mdrs was both as the health and safety officer, so making sure that these guys were well taken care of, and also as the crew biologist during our rotation. And so my project during that time was to collect plants, lichens and cyanobacteria, as Jane mentioned. Now obviously the first crews to Mars aren't going to be collecting plants, but by doing so at Mdrs, we can actually create a baseline of the various vascular plants, lichen and cyanobacterial species that are there that can be used to calibrate further astrobiological work at the station. So it's really, my project was supporting Mdrs research in the long term. All of these specimens that I collected are actually being documented at the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. That's my employer. We're like the Canadian Smithsonian, just a little smaller. And as we go forward, I'll be continuing on with a lot of this work, especially in the Arctic, where a lot of the plants are really interesting for their adaptations to the extreme environments.
And I'm the other Paul on the crew. My name's Paul Knightley. I'm from Kansas City area here in the U.S. I'm an environmental geologist professionally. I've always had an interest in space flight, and as this was a selection crew for the MA365 mission, my research focused on a proof of concept study for work that would be done in the Arctic. The research that I hope to carry out in the Arctic will be measuring the long-term variations of various volatile organics coming out of the permafrost, which obviously in Utah is a little hard to measure, but I was able to do a full field trial of all of my equipment and methodologies, and was able to validate the processes that I had in place and make improvements. I also conducted a general geological study of the area, collecting rock specimens and cataloging them. And going forward, I've looked to build on all of that. I've got a number of field studies in the works that I'll be doing as a part of MA80, as well as additional studies up at FMARS looking at various aspects of the impact crater there. So.
Hello, I am Ian Silversides. I'm an engineer. I live in Montreal. And so I have a background in mechanical engineering, materials, and structures. I work with structures now. My research project at Mdrs focused on structural inspections and repairs to the HAB and the limitations involved with wearing a spacesuit and trying to perform useful work outside. Now the repairs that I did were on a mock model, which involved trying to glue aluminum panels together using epoxy. And when you're wearing a spacesuit and working outside with all the conditions, it is something that is very hard to do. To touch upon something that Robert mentioned earlier, once you arrive at the HAB, you have your research project, you know that will occupy a portion of your time, but there are so many other things to do, and lack of time is not a problem at all. That was an amazing experience for me because I got to learn a lot about geology and botany. from my crew members. And we put together a few slides to share our experience over at MDRS with you. Of course, arriving there, our intent was to get first-hand experience. We wanted to go on EVA as much as we could and place our own boots on Mars. We were able to fit pretty much one EVA a day. A bunch of that was exploring at the beginning to learn about the surrounding environment, and later on be able to take samples of plants and also investigate the rocks that surround MDRS. It was hard operating with the physical constraints of wearing a spacesuit, but it was also very exciting. So this is something that drove us to go outside every day. Do you have comments on this?
Yeah, I'll speak on this a little bit since this is the geological slide. One of the key aspects of my study, and will be an important part of my work at FMARS, will be collecting soil core samples. And so one of the things that I do on a daily basis at my job as an environmental geologist is drill work and oftentimes collecting hand-augured soil samples. And so I wanted to explore what the implications of wearing a spacesuit would do to what's normally a fairly simple manual task here on Earth. And that was also incorporated into some other studies by the crewmates to see how well non-trained crew members could perform tasks with minimal instruction. Yeah, it was overall very successful scope of work.
So here you've got the various plants that I was studying during my research project at MDRS. So you've got Paul walking through a giant patch of native Martian flora over here. That's the big stem rabbit brush. I'll spare you guys all the Latin names. But it's a part of the San Rafael swell, or it's just outside the San Rafael swell, the area. So it's got a really well-known flora, but not a specific checklist for MDRS. And so that's what I was attempting to do. So a lot of cacti, lichens, that's in the bottom right, and endolithic cyanobacteria, which we're working to characterize using genetic techniques back home. Altogether, we made about just shy of 70 collections. A large part of those are from the aster family, the same family as sunflowers. And this data is actually being written up as a manuscript right now, currently in prep with the Biodiversity Data Journal. And so that's an open access journal and will be available to all future crews going to MDRS.
When we were on EVA and the Pauls were not with us, we were always on the lookout for interesting rock formations or different plant samples. Knowledge overlap and crossover was something that was very important for us to be able to work as a cohesive team. They taught us how to perform samples and document our findings, so that was an interesting part of our EVAs. We were always on the lookout for something new. A lot of our work did also involve preparing EVAs, preparing our activities, writing reports in the HAB. So the kitchen doubled as a workspace, and that it was effective working because we were so close together and we were able to consult each other and help each other out. This is one of the other engineers on our crew. This is our French colleague, Alexandre Mangeot. And in the upper left corner here, he is modifying some equipment to take, okay, so it was heartbeat. It was a biomonitor that he was modifying for us to be able to use while on EVA, while using the suits without breaking simulation. And over here is Claude Michel Laroche, which is both an engineer and trained as a physicist. He was responsible for continuing the growth experiments that Crew 142 had started in the Green Hab. So we were able to benefit from using the Green Hab. And do we see them? What the crew had started growing over here was wheat grass, which is a type of grass that we can actually digest. So near the end of our simulation, we had the chance to try a wheatgrass salad, which was really interesting. We had no real ways of preparing it. So this is something that was really interesting and can be improved upon. And then also, we took the time to explore food, make food, and enjoy food together. I think that was one of the key things that kept us as a cohesive group, is that every day was a challenge to try and find new recipes that we could make with the freeze-dried food that we were using. When we arrived in the Green Hab, we had a box of lyophilized food. Everything was dry. If you tasted it dry, it was not interesting at all. Once rehydrated, it was okay. So for me, it became a game every day to try and find a recipe and make something interesting. At the end of the report, we had so much fun making food that I compiled a report with the pictures of all of our meals, and that was a fun activity to do every day. So this is the start of our baking. We had no yeast in the Hab, so I made, I would make a loaf of very dense bread every day until we ran out of flour. And then our food experiments coincided with American Thanksgiving, and our commander went full out and prepared us a very nice Spam turkey Thanksgiving dinner. Mdrs is absolutely unique. The scenery is amazing, and it did allow for a bunch of photo ops. A lot of us are photography enthusiasts, and we brought back a ton of pictures, and some of them are really impressive. And I just want to finish with this slide. These are pictures that we took at night. The sky that you see at night is amazing and inspiring, and we hope to one day be able to take actual pictures like this from Mars.
All right, let's open it up to questions. All right, this gentleman right here.
Could you talk a little bit more about when you leave the Hab, how far do you take being in the simulation in terms of the spacesuit? Do you have to be in it all the time? How do you perform necessary functions in it? Does it provide heat or air? I mean, just a little bit about, it looks very confining, and I heard some comments like that. I thought someone could speak to that a little more.
Well, the crews, when they go out, are supposed to be wearing spacesuits. That is now these spacesuits, they've evolved a bit since the original design, but the design considerations of the original design still hold, which was to attempt to impose some of the limitations on the crew that they would be faced wearing a real spacesuit in terms of diminishment of situational awareness, mobility, agility, dexterity, and so forth. Now, it's impossible to make an exact duplicate because, for example, a real spacesuit might weigh at least 100 pounds, but you wouldn't feel it as 100 pounds on Mars because it would feel like 38, and furthermore, your own weight would be reduced. But yet, it would affect your inertia, it would affect different things. So we had to kind of compromise on that. Our spacesuits do not weigh 100 pounds. A spacesuit that weighed that much on Earth would have a pretty serious impact on someone's ability to do field work. And so fortunately, that they wouldn't feel that on Mars. And so I think, including everything, the boots, the helmet, the backpack, and all that, probably weigh about 40 pounds. Now, the spacesuits do pump air into the helmet, not from a compressed air bottle, just from the environment. However, the duration that it can do this is limited by the battery in the backpack, which is probably about 8 hours. Generally speaking, you cannot communicate directly by sound to another person, so you use the radio, as you would. In the old days anyway, we used to have clumsy boots. U.S. Army cold weather boots were the boots that went with the spacesuit. I think those have worn out and people are just using hiking boots now, if I'm not mistaken. But we used to wear the Mickey Mouse boots, and we still do in the Arctic, where they also have the attractive feature of being appropriate for the environment. Originally, and that's another thing, the spacesuits actually have to be able to be used where you really are. When we first designed the spacesuit, someone brought in a Teva moon boot. I say, well, this is kind of cool, and it even looks like a spacesuit boot and so forth, but it couldn't take the rough terrain at all. It just fell apart. So the Army cold weather boots were reasonably tough and so forth. Now, there was another issue, which was like, how do you go to the bathroom? Okay, and we thought about this. Actual spacesuits have a diaper in them. Okay, and we just at a certain point said no. And so there is a kind of a fly, and you're not supposed to use it. It is breaking sim to do it, but if worse comes to worse, rather than pee in your pants, you just do it. Just with the knowledge that a real one would have that. The spacesuits do have a water nipple. You can actually drink water while you're in the suit, but that's the limit of what you could eat or drink. So if you go out on a long EVA, leaving the hab in the morning, coming back in the late afternoon, you are typically hungry, but that's just how it is. And then also they would wear thick ski gloves to limit the dexterity, and you very quickly find out that you want things with simple controls.
First question is for botanist Sokolov. My first patent, actually my second patent, redesigned DNA, was not quite three-dimensional chess, but it probably was worth a lot more money. But the upshot is that it will give you, we have a way of doing handheld DNA, ribosomal RNA detection of life forms. Would that be useful to you?
In a word, yes.
So we should talk after.
We should talk.
I mean, the second, for the engineer, you mentioned you didn't have yeast. I mean, obviously, human society has known for years and years and years that yeast adds nutritional value to grass, okay? And so this yeast case takes nothing to carry along, and of course it replicates itself forever. It has the side advantage or disadvantage of producing alcohol as the fermentation product. Is that the reason why you don't have yeast? Because you don't want alcohol? But if you do want alcohol, I mean, it seems to me it would add a great deal of nutritional value to whatever you collect at no additional weight.
Alcohol is a very good way, and it's to preserve water over long periods of time. Myself, back home, I have been home brewing, and I know the benefits of using alcohol to preserve water. No, we do not use it. I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Yes, but we can deal with that.
Let me just say this, one thing that caught me a little. In the Arctic, we use a bread maker, and we do have yeast. And it's very attractive. I mean, bread, flour, is a very expeditionary food. It can be preserved for very long periods of time, and then it can be turned into a very attractive and tasty kind of food with fresh baked bread. And it was always great in the Arctic whenever someone would actually use the bread maker and make a nice big loaf of bread and fresh bread. And of course, I mean, the reason why historically bread has been an important food for humanity is that it can be preserved indefinitely without refrigeration and then turned into very wholesome food. And I think having a bread maker with yeast is something that we should bring to Mars without question.
If there was no yeast, it was my fault. I'm one of the people in charge of the food. At the end of every year, we have an inventory, and at the beginning of every season, we provide food with a view to holding over and using what's still in the inventory. Occasionally, something gets dropped. And occasionally they run out of yeast, or a crew won't tell us that they've used up the last of the yeast, and then the next crew gets stuck making spit bread or sourdough starter. I should say most of the crews had yeast. We did have one crew that wanted to brew beer, and we told them no. NASA has a no alcohol policy. Of course, the Russian Space Agency does not. But in a 2-week mission, it's not reasonable to brew beer because it's at least a 6-week process. So there you have it.
Other questions over here?
Yes, I have a question. Kay Warren, I'm also an MDRS volunteer, refit volunteer. Yeast. I just have a general question because I know that Ian was talking about doing experiments with food and et cetera. For those crew members that are vegetarian, nutritional yeast has such high nutritional value for proteins and everything. Has any studies been done on generating yeast, since we're on the subject of alcohol and brewing notwithstanding, for nutritional and sustenance means? It's inactive yeast is what nutritional yeast is.
Nutritional yeast that you buy at the health food store is typically it's a brewer's yeast, or sometimes it's specially grown. If it's a brewer's yeast, it's debittered to get rid of the hop flavor. And yes, it can be a useful flavorant. It's a flavor enhancer. It's a protein supplement. Our policy at MDRS is that we provide sort of a standard pantry of ingredients if somebody has special nutritional needs, like they're a vegan or they are kosher diner, or they are gluten-free. We provide some extra food to suit their needs, and we also, after several years of changing policies, our current policy is that if somebody wants to bring some sort of food to MDRS for their crew to use, they can do it so long as the food that they bring is the sort that you would bring to Mars. So it would be dried or canned or in a jar, and certainly nutritional yeast would satisfy those constraints. But we haven't looked at producing it on site. It's very difficult to keep things clean at MDRS. And when you are actually creating food, particularly something that's fermented, there's always a concern about contamination with other organisms that might make someone sick. Then also nutritional yeast, although it's grown wet, then it has to be dried. And we don't have the proper processing equipment there. So just as on Mars, food processing would be quite a challenge at MDRS. So our crews generally stick to home cooking from the freeze-dried and dehydrated ingredients that we provide.
This gentleman, the green, well, okay, her, then the green.
Jean, I have a question. Are you currently tracking, or will you in the future track the psychological profiles and the way that the different crews or the different teams integrate, what makes them work and what doesn't?
In the past, there have been some crew experiments of this sort where one crew member would give surveys to the remaining crew members and kind of track moods or psychological states throughout the mission. We haven't done that recently because such research requires an institutional review board approval, and MDRS no longer has its own IRB, and so anyone who wanted to do that kind of work would have to get IRB approval away from MDRS. We will accept that, but we don't confer that sort of approval ourselves because there are a lot of very fine points that are really not appropriate for a volunteer remote science team to get involved in. Another thing about that is that over 2 weeks, that's a fairly short-term mission, and if we're trying to draw conclusions from a short-term mission that would apply to a long-term mission, it's difficult to do that on the basis of 2 weeks, particularly when many crews are still getting to know each other at the end of the 2 weeks. So this is something that might be appropriate for the MA-80 mission, but it's something that would have to be arranged through the science team, Cheryl Bishop, and the mission director, Shannon Rupert.
Okay, this gentleman.
So, on Mars, it seems to be when you're in a...
Use the microphone.
What? There, okay. If you're on Mars and you are out in a suit, that suit will be pressurized because the outside atmosphere is at such a low pressure. Are you using, are the suits on your missions that we're doing right now pressurized to test the ability of people to work in a pressurized suit, or do you even do that part of the time, or not?
No, they're not. That was beyond our means to provide such suits. So the limitations of the suits is, first of all, carrying around the extra weight, the limitations of potential malfunctions in the battery, in the air pack, or because the suits become extremely uncomfortable if you don't have the air blowing into them. And basically you are simulated dead, and yeah. And the clumsy gloves, the clumsy boots, the limitation of duration imposed by the electricity, the limitation of communication. We don't have pressurization of the suit. It just couldn't manage it. Look, our hope, let me just address a question that hasn't been brought up, because also, you know, Gene Hunter here is running the High Seas program, which is another Mars analog program, which has got some NASA funding, and they're doing various things out there. We started this effort. We created first the Mars Arctic Station and then the Desert Station and began running sims with the idea of trying to learn about Mars exploration through operational simulations. We also hoped to encourage others to engage in this work, and hopefully others with greater resources who could do it at greater fidelity. Okay, you know, Kim Binstead, who is Gene's coworker on our on the high seas, is a graduate of. She went to FMARS in 2003, I believe. What? Oh yes, in 2007, but she might have gone earlier. Yeah, MDRS, and Gene's been a participant in our program, and then they went off and started their own program. My greatest hope is that NASA will look at this and say, let's pick up the ball, let's show these people how this can really be done. In other words, the way I view our work, it's kind of like Galileo looking at the sky with his first little crude telescope. Now, he made some discoveries with that telescope, which in fact are significant ones: the moons of Jupiter, the craters of the moon, the rings of Saturn, I believe. Okay, but he did something else, is he demonstrated the utility of the telescope for astronomy. And so that subsequent to Galileo, other investigators with much better telescopes, Herschel's telescope, the Mount Palomar telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, and then we're going to have the James Webb Telescope, and maybe someday the High Definition Space Telescope, have made much greater discoveries. You know, they discovered that the stars are suns. They discovered there's such a thing as the galaxy. There's such a thing as millions of galaxies. They discovered that galaxies were running away from each other. The universe was expanding, and so there was a big bang. Okay, they made all those other discoveries with much greater telescopes than Galileo's telescope. So the idea of this program is both to make discoveries that it can, also to inspire the public with a vision of humans exploring on Mars, very important, but also to show the scientific community the value of this kind of work, so that hopefully more and more people will be doing this, including people with much greater resources who can create a higher fidelity simulation. And so, I mean, look, you know, NASA talks about, well, we have to go to the moon to practice for Mars. They could practice for the Mars pretty good in the Arctic or the Antarctic. And, you know, if they had a budget of, say, $50 million a year, okay, which is way beyond our, you know, we're doing this on a budget of like $50,000 a year. So that's 3 orders of magnitude more money, but it's insignificant for them, okay? They could be doing the equivalent of a moon base, and yes, have fully pressurized suits and all the rest of the gear that you would want to have, okay? So that is part of our goal with this. We want to get NASA, ESA doing this with full fidelity. And, you know, look, the shrinks can have various psychological criteria for selecting individual crew members. But one thing that we have found is that the very same crew member who could be an extremely strong and valuable crew member in one crew can be a horrible crew member in another crew, okay, because the chemistry was wrong. So that the only way you can really test Mars crews is by testing them as crews, not merely as individuals. Individuals, I mean, certain things come out with individual evaluation, but really you want to test the crew. And when they finally get around to choosing the crew that goes to Mars, they should make all the individual assessments they can, but then some short duration crew studies, yes, but then for instance, take 3 what look like 3 crack crews, okay, really good crews, and put them in 3 different Mars analog stations in different places in the Arctic, task them to do a sustained mission for a year, doing field geology and microbiology under really good, strict Mars analog protocols, and see which one works best as a team, which one holds up, which one does the best job. And then that's the crew you send to Mars.
All so much. Thank you. A round of applause, please.